Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Cissy, who is our community manager of parenting with ACEs, and I will put that link in the chat. Cissy, it's all
Great.
you.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here, and it's nice to see so many familiar faces as well. I am thrilled to introduce you all to Rebecca Lewis-Pankratz, who is one of my favorite people on the planet. So I'm very excited that we're having this conversation today. I met Rebecca, I think, through Twitter. Her handle's Poverty's Edge. But she is also the director of learning centers at ESDAC and a poverty consultant. And the topic that we're going to talk about today is poverty. We're going to talk about Rebecca's personal story, as well as the work she's doing and how she combines stories and stats and strength and hope, makes ACEs science very accessible to people. She is a brilliant writer, an amazing speaker. She's equally passionate and compassionate. And Rebecca, I would just love it if you could tell people a little bit about, well, first, thank you for being here. And also, if you could let people know a little bit about what a poverty circle is and how you came to this work.
There we go. I was having trouble getting unmuted. Hi, everybody. Man, Cissy, when you were introducing me, like my body got a little funky and I felt my chest kind of get tight. And why do I still get a little bit scared to do this stuff? So, Cissy, it's just so good to connect with you. I miss you. And it's good to be here. You know, the simple, easy kind of introduction is that I was born to a single mom in California. My mom has 9 ACEs and I have 8. Poverty was just kind of part of the gig from day one. My grandma helped us get out of Southern California when I was 5 and we moved to Kansas. And naturally things got better, right, in Kansas because it was a small town. And but the town was primarily middle class. So for me growing up, I really knew that I was poor, right? And I didn't get out of poverty growing up. I quit school when I was 16 and fell in love with somebody and stepped right into a pretty intense marriage. And next 20 years was addictions and trauma and abuse and poverty and crime, all kinds of stuff like that. I got out of that abusive marriage at 29 and started having children. I was a single mom for a very long time. I have 3 little boys by 3 different dads. I wasn't married to any of their fathers. As soon as I would get pregnant, I would run. So I brought kids into another kind of ripple in the cycle. I got clean and sober in 2011. And not too long after that, I had the kind of alcoholism where I drank so much I was dying. I was physically addicted to alcohol, so I had no choice but to get sober or die. And that happened, and it was that was hard but powerful. And then I accidentally bumped up against a poverty project in my small middle class community. And I was really suspicious when I went to this project. I was very judgmental of the middle class, and I had been othered most of my life. And I was really looking for that in this experience, right? And I started going to this process. And the first night I got to this project, there were some powerful looking middle-class women there. And they sat us down at a table and they said, look, here's the deal. We see families struggling in our community and we think poverty is the root cause of that. And we want to solve it. And we need people like you who are living it to tell us what to do. So instantly they disarmed me and they empowered me, and thus began this relationship and this journey of mutual respect where people who are experiencing poverty were invited to the table to lead, not to be fixed, but to lead. We were invited into community conversations around, what's the perspective that's been missing from the table. And so finally, I had spent my whole life on the outside in my mind, real or imagined, that was my experience. And suddenly I was at the table and people were interested in me. They were interested in my children. Not too long after that, there was a job opening at that project, and I got to be on staff there. And we built that project into the largest, most successful one like that in the country, getting more families completely out of poverty, mostly generational, than any other project had ever done. From there, I kind of started consulting in schools because teachers were like watching my kids transform before their eyes. In the middle of that journey, I found toxic stress, Harvard Institute for Developing Child. I found the ACE study, and I'm like, well, holy crap, I'm going to try not to cuss on this recording. No wonder, right? And then I found Paper Tigers. God put Jim Sporleader from Paper Tigers in my life. I started consulting in schools, and we've been off and running ever since. I still build poverty projects. We have 12 in Kansas right now. So we have like 250 parents that we're working with. The middle class are an important part of our poverty projects, and wealthy people if they show up. We train the middle class on how to do authentic connection around mutual respect. Our families are leading, co-leading, and designing the understanding of what poverty is and isn't in our communities, and what our families need from the community, from the systems. And we just started our first project in Bond, Illinois. And I was so excited when I went there because in rural Kansas, which is where most of my projects are, like everybody's white. And so we went to Bond, Illinois, and I got to meet some incredible Black families. So they're leading us now on poverty, trauma, and race. And the middle class that brought us to the table were all white. And so we've been trying to figure that out. Like it's been incredible. And so Cissy, that was really long introduction. Hey, I'm Rebecca. It's nice to meet you guys.
That was wonderful. And actually, I even want to go backwards a little bit more and hear more about, thank you so much for being here and for sharing. And just even how does the poverty projects that you're involved in work? Like how often do they meet? How do people find out about them? How do people join? Just like, could you share even more about that?
Yeah, so we go in when a community says, typically you'll find that somewhere in some churches, people have been praying about how to help this. And we kind of find our way there. And we go in and we kind of get like what you guys would call a community champion, but we call them a community liaison. And they go around and start spreading the word. We raise some money to hire staff. And then we recruit families. And we find somebody that is in the middle class that has trust with families in poverty. So some kind of helping role where it's just known in town that everybody loves her. These families trust her. And then from there, we recruit our first class. And the families come usually the first class, depending on how recruitment went. We have anywhere from 10 to 20 adults. So they show up once a week, and there's a meal and childcare. And the first 20 weeks, we go through a kind of a curriculum called Getting Ahead in a Just Getting By World. The curriculum's not magic, but it is the only curriculum that I have found that doesn't try and fix poor people, because families don't want that. We can smell it a mile away, but it's very conversational, and it's all about activating voice and kind of laying out some of the class system stuff and the hidden rules that people have. And so first 20 weeks, we go through that. After 20 weeks, we have a graduation, and it's a big event. Like people show up and there's a celebration, and our, we call them leaders, our core leaders get up and share about what the 20 weeks has meant to them. At the end of 20 weeks, they design goals for their lives on how to get out of poverty. And then after graduation, we've been recruiting and training middle-class people to come alongside of them in what's called a match and be their friends, not mentors. This is explicitly taught to our middle class. You are not a mentor. Very rarely, if ever, do any of the middle class who come to the table, have they ever gotten out of poverty as an adult? So they're not mentoring, right? Because mentor implies that you've been somewhere that I want to go, right? So the middle class are trained that this is about connection and support. And they also have to build goals for their lives too. So then we match them, typically a core leader, somebody that is working their way out of poverty, will get matched with 2 to 3 middle-class friends. And the core leaders, they design the programming for they design the programming. So they continue to come once a week and we do programming. The core friends, the middle class, they just come once a month and everybody works on goals and connection. And we encourage the core leaders and the core friends to get together outside of the project and just build a relationship, hang out, have coffee. We encourage our core friends to go to, if our families are caught up in the court system, if our families are caught up in the school system, we encourage our core friends to go and walk alongside of that and not fix it, witness it, support it. So much different when a family goes to court and you've got this middle-class person standing next to them. And very soon what happens is the middle class really start to get tuned into a world that they've never had access to before. And they start to see some of the disparities and the injustice, right? So that match lasts 18 months. And then our families come for 2 to 5 years, the core leaders. Typically takes 2 to 5 years for a person to get all the way out of poverty, financial poverty. But after they've been matched for 6 months, we turn around and start another group, another 20 weeks, right? So we've always got this couple of cohorts happening. I've walked alongside of many families that have gotten completely out of generational poverty. So coming in, making $12,000, $13,000, $15,000 a year. And families now making $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, $80,000, $90,000, $120,000 a year. And we rarely pay attention to money in these projects. We set the goal that we want to help you get out of poverty if that's what you want. But really, just like the ACEs science teaches us, what gets people out of poverty is connection, access to the table, shared power, respect, voice, right? And the middle class, they've got their flaws and their faults, but they typically have access to the power structures and they typically have access to the opportunities. So having those middle class relationships gives people access to those things, right? And so I've witnessed so many miracles. I've witnessed kids getting off of medicine in my families. I have seen kids getting off of mental health case plans. I've seen marriages. I've seen divorces that needed to happen. I have seen home ownership, degrees completed. I've seen my families go into certain professional settings and change the culture of those settings because of the authenticity that they bring. I've seen kids on traveling sports teams, seen cars that run and car insurance all year long, like all those kind of good things, right? It's an incredible process. But I think the biggest thing that's happening, aside from families' lives transforming and them having access to build the lives that they deserve, I think the biggest thing happening is the middle class is transforming alongside of them. And we're starting to tell new stories, right? Because when we don't know each other, we can tell all kinds of stories. When we start to spend time together, we're like, whoa, you're not anything like I thought you were. And you're not that different from me, right? And the families in poverty start realizing, oh, there's addiction in the middle class. There's marital issues. There's money problems. There's all this other stuff, right? Because I think for me, I thought everybody had it all put together. And that's not true either, right? So there's all kinds of transformation going on. Cissy?
It's amazing. I have like a million questions and I'm already taking notes. I want to open it up though, if people have questions, if you have questions for Rebecca, to please put them in the chat. I don't know if other people know about poverty projects already or not, but I haven't known a lot, so I'm learning a lot. But I also wanted to talk to you, Rebecca, about that shift from mentor and friends, because I think for a lot of us who have done any work in social services, you know, we're taught like this idea that we are modeling for families how to be, including getting out of poverty. Like I think I told you before, I worked at a shelter for homeless families. And on my first day, I was told that one of my jobs as a 20-year-old was to model for parents how to interact with children. And I was like, I'm not a mother. I'm not a parent. I'm not poor right now. I was a college student, even though I grew up in poverty, but just because I was presumed to be a middle-class college student, it was presumed that I would know how to model parenting skills, that I would have a better way of interacting, and that would be instructional and useful. And that was my first time hearing that phrase, modeling, modeling appropriate behavior. And I was shocked at the time because I was like, the focus wasn't on housing and food and apartments. It was really on like manners and behaviors, and at a shelter for homeless families that are looking for housing. So I think that idea of modeling and mentoring that you say, having only been by somebody who's been through the same experience, it's still pretty radical, I think. And I think it's wonderful and necessary, but I think you're one of the first people I know that consider that foundational. So I just wanted to know, have you had resistance when you've, approached the work this way, or did that always just seem intuitive in how you did it? Or,
Cissy, it's really interesting because I needed access to this project. I didn't want to go there. It was by accident. I felt like I owed this lady at a church a favor. So I was going to go and smell test it, but I already knew they didn't have what I wanted because they were going to be the same old, right? They were going to tell me, this is your life. Look at your kids. Here's where you messed up. And I already knew all that stuff. And so I think people come at it trying to help people, but they don't understand that they're inadvertently sending a message that you are fundamentally broken. You're fundamentally flawed, and I'm not. And I have something to give you that will help you. And, without ever addressing the systems that are in place, mm-hmm. the shame, the toxic shame, the othering. And, we rarely talk about class in America. We don't like to talk about it. We don't really know how to talk about it. We don't know how to talk about race either. Some of these bigger conversations. And so it is incredibly important. We culture from our staff is probably one of the biggest things we pay attention to. The technical parts of how do you set it up and what needs to happen on this night and on this month, that's easy. It's how do we show up and not try and fix people or rescue people? And how do we become curious about people that aren't like us? How do we learn to heal our judgment? And judgment comes on both sides. It's not just the middle-class people judging the poor people or trying to, right? Like I always tell a story, Cissy, of a middle-class friend. He was this retired guy, and he'd had the shift, right? And he came to me one day and he was like, I'm so mad. I was at the barber and they were talking about these people on welfare and food stamps. And I got so ticked off because they don't know what they're talking about. And I looked at him and I was like, Marlon, don't worry about it. I said, we're talking crap on you guys in the trailer park too. It happens, right? Because we don't know each other. And so we tell these stories, these narratives. And the only way to heal that, Cissy, is to really authentically, in a mutual, respectful relationship, get to know people. Get to know, become curious, release judgment, embrace curiosity. And so, yeah, that's a huge part of how we set things up and maintain the culture, and teaching our staff too. You want to help people access resources such as, how do I get my student loans out of default? What if I want to buy a house? How do I get a driver's license if I've got all these, whatever, right? The coach in our project, you have a coach and you have a coordinator. The coach becomes really adept at connecting people to resources, but we never tell the families what their goals are to get out of poverty. We don't design a path for them. We tell our families, we know that tonight, when you look at this number, for me, when I looked at the number to be out of poverty, it was $50,000 a year. I had 3 kids. I didn't even know anybody that made that much money, right? Like, I just kind of looked at them and blinked. And they said, we just need you to say yes. Just say yes. You don't know how, you don't know when, but just say yes to this process. And we do the same thing with all the families. And people, when they get enough safety and enough connection, things start happening in your brain, right? Like when I got there, I had so much fight, flight, freeze, and survival in my brain. Like this part of my brain's way overdeveloped. And then they started talking about future, and I was trying to see into the future that night. I couldn't see past 2 weeks, right? And that's when I became fascinated with brain research. I'm like, what is happening? And I also was an American who was taught that if you do a bunch of drugs, you only have so many brain cells and you burn them up, you don't get any more, right? Like we were taught that. We were taught 0 to 5 brain science, that if these bad things happen to you from 0 to 5, your brain architecture is built, you're screwed. And I felt something happening in my brain that was giving me the ability to see forward, to plan, to dream. I was becoming less reactive. I was becoming more collaborative. I was able to walk into new settings and meet strangers and trust them, people who weren't like me. All these things are happening. I could feel it. Something was changing, and I was watching it happen with families I was working with. That's why I became fascinated with brain science. And so setting up the culture of any process, any system, any service, we can get out of the idea that we need to fix people because they're fundamentally broken. We start asking people what they need, and then asking people, how are you going to get that? And what support do you need from us to get it? Right?
Yeah. And I just wanted to say to everybody who's here, if you ever have a chance to go to the Bridging to Resilience conference in Kansas, I've been to that conference, and it was the first conference this introvert has ever been to, and I left energized and excited and connected. And so what you're talking about, what happens to the brain, it's for the school community, but parents are central, students are central, parents are leading panels, students are leading workshops and exercises. It was so different, and it felt really different, and it felt really welcoming. So I just, that culture carries over, I know, in your conference work as well. I totally blanked on what I was going to ask you. Oh, when you were talking about, I did want to talk about if you talked about race and poverty circles, because I know, especially with criminal justice and child welfare system, poor families are often penalized, but especially poor families of color. So I was interested both in what your experiences with the child welfare system are, because I know you're doing some transformational work there as well, and then also just how race figures in the poverty circles. It sounds like that's a new thing too that's happening.
Yeah. And Cissy, I'll just be really transparent, really honest right now. I have a lot to learn. I also have been really quiet while we've been having this big shift, this needed shift in our country to new conversations, and people are being tuned in. In rural communities that I'm familiar with, there's a bunch of white poverty. So the cops are after us. The child welfare system's after us. You go down to the city court every week. It's always the same folks, right? But I also understand the race factor to a degree. Like, I got to go into the big prison here by my house. I went in there to talk to some people that thought they might be doing trauma informed, but they really weren't. But they let me go down in the community I live in, we have 0.08% of our community is Black out of 14,000 people. And I went 20 miles from my community to where the prison is, and they let me go down and look at the guys, and I was just devastated. Most of the guys that were in there were Black and brown. And I would say 80% of them were under 25. And there were also white men in there and Latino. I mean, I'm not going to say that there weren't, but when you come from a predominantly white area and everybody that's in the prison is Black and brown, like, we got a problem. Yeah. And then I asked the guy that took me down there, he wasn't the warden. I didn't get to see the warden, but some other guy. And I'm like, how many of these people in here do you think are from poverty? And he laughed at me. And he said, Rebecca, all of them. I know that for the moms I work with, you ask a mom in poverty, what's your number one fear? Number one fear, like that, have my kids taken away. We are living under an evil system that is stealing our children. I'm just going to say it. And we have no idea how to yet. We're figuring it out. We're asking new questions. how to wrap around parents and heal the home, how to focus on our parents and help them heal their lives. Are there times where that is not possible? Absolutely. But our child welfare system operates from an idea of better safe than sorry. Well, who's safe and who's sorry? So, and then, you know, I saw some stuff come up in the chat about race and the poverty projects, and I don't know, but like I've met all these Black men and women in Bond County, Illinois, and they're amazing. I'm like, I got so excited. I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys are going to teach us like what to do. And again, we always need to be going to the people that are experiencing the issues we want to solve and asking them. People that are experiencing the issues that we want to, they're the experts, not people who've studied it, not people who've signed on to work with it, right? It's the folks who are experiencing those issues. And then I tell my families too, I always say, you know, I lived terrified of child welfare. I had cops pick my kids up for walking down the street, 2 third graders, bring them home like, hey, brought your kids home. And they're looking in my house, like, you know, like you don't do that to the people across town, right? You don't, I see little kids outside playing this age all the time. You don't pick their kids up and go knock on people's doors, right? You don't do that to them. But I can tell you now that I am definitely officially middle class. Somebody comes to my door for my kids, I'm going to call my attorney. You don't get to do that to me, right? And so I have no idea if money will make people happy, but money buys power.
Yep, absolutely. It's, we, as you know, we grew up, my mom was also 16 when she started having kids and had 3 kids and different fathers. And so we moved out of poverty when I was growing up. So we were poor till I was 10, and then we lived in a middle class community, and then we lived in an upper middle class community. So same set of ACEs, but it's a really different experience to have 8 ACEs when the entire community is poor versus when the community has a lot of resources. Even though the individual families' stuff was similar, the community had a much different level of stress in the community and resources. And I think that difference, we don't always talk about either. But one of the things you say that I love so much, you say 2 quotes that I love. One is, those closest to the pain should be closest to the power. And I know in your work, you make sure that that's true. Like, so you've said where you're having a meeting that's about any particular group, if that group's not at the table, you don't have the meeting. Like, that meeting has, how do you do that? Like, how do you enforce that with, like, how do you make that change in a way that doesn't alienate the people that are at the table, but also is bringing in the people that should be at the table?
Again, it's all about relationships, Cissy. And sometimes, you know, I've spent enough time in middle class now to realize that we end up spinning at these meetings and you get stuck and people start to recycle thought because they don't know what else to do, right? But, you know, it's like, hey, we're stuck. And again, so there's so many different ways that this can show up. But if we're talking about kids, especially at-risk kids, do we have any at-risk kids in here? Or are we just making assumptions? And then people are like, well, you know, well, let's get some at-risk kids, right? If we're talking about teachers and they're not in the room, well, let's go talk to some teachers. Because so often what we think, there's a disconnect, right? And so I have just always found that if you can get some authentic people, like in an authentic way to the table, not authentic people, if you can access people and get them to the table in an authentic way and ask them what they need, it's brilliant. They always have this insight about what's really happening and what they need. They don't need outside people to come in and design what they need. They need to be asked, right? From any big issue that we're trying to figure out. We need to be asking the people that are experiencing that issue. And so just kind of showing up like that and demanding that in a loving way that, hey, I don't want to go any further into investing my time in this until we're really talking to folks that are experiencing this.
Yeah.
That's important, right?
Yeah.
And then we don't have enough people that are close to the pain. close to the power. We don't. It's a great thing to say, but how do we build that?
Yeah.
Right? We got a long ways to go.
Yep. Yep. Well, I think the poverty circles are a great start. You also say, one of the things that you say that I love so much is the brain on trauma is like the brain on poverty, and you connect that when you're doing some of your work. And so can you talk about how you make that connection and what you mean by that?
Yeah, I primarily train in schools. And originally I just trained around poverty and trauma, and I had people pushing back on me, and they're like, trauma just doesn't live in poverty. And I was like, yeah, but I get it. But poverty in and of itself is traumatizing. And so there was just some real learning I had to do there. Now I get called into schools that have like 3% free and reduced, 6%, because trauma is, our middle class and our wealthy are starting to wake up to the idea that they can also heal. But back to your conversation, Cissy, there's actually brain research that's separate from the trauma research that was done. And it was by some guys, I can't say their last name, but what was it called? Cognitive bandwidth. If you look up poverty research on cognitive bandwidth, these guys were doing brain studies, right? And that was the first brain research I found that connected kind of a brain experience to poverty. Because remember, I told you my brain felt like it was changing, and so I was on this hunt, right? What I can tell people is that toxic stress, which alters brain development, the anatomy of toxic stress is powerlessness, overwhelm, and isolation. That's the anatomy of toxic stress. Trauma, it's powerlessness and overwhelm. But where trauma becomes toxic is when you add the isolation in. There's no protective factors. There's no buffers. There's no relationships, right? There's no resources. I always tell people, poverty every day is overwhelm, powerlessness, and isolation, right? So you already have the cocktail for toxic stress just from folks experiencing life without enough and life without access, life with being othered. So that keeps your brain on high alert, which is not all bad. I don't like to use the word brain damage. I don't like that because that's not my story. My brain got overwired for survival, and it has served me well. Mm-hmm. But once I had what I needed and this part of my brain could finish growing, now I have a super brain, right? So we always want to be very careful when we're talking to people and helping them understand this science, that we're not teaching kids or adults that your brain is damaged. It's not. It did something remarkable that brains do. It adapted. And now we're just going to finish doing this part up here. And you're going to get something that other people who didn't go through that don't have. And it's that intuition and that sixth sense, right? That extreme compassion. So yes, I do believe that poverty in and of itself can be very traumatizing for people. I do believe one of the things we have to be careful about is saying that kids in poor, impoverished neighborhoods are all experiencing abuse and neglect, right? Because trauma does not necessarily mean abuse and neglect. And we have to ask ourselves about our systems. What part do they play in all of this, right? I'm just going to give a shameless plug for, I've looked at mass incarceration. I have read books. I have sat down. We need to end the war on drugs. Period. Right? That's what needs to happen. You want to look at where we need to go. We need to end the war on drugs, because that is really a war on poverty and poor people and people who are traumatized. Right? Yep. And the war on drugs, we just empty out the prisons, right? Start figuring this out. But anyways, that's another talk, Cissy.
Let's go ahead and open it up to questions. So I'm going to scroll way back. So
yes, overwhelm, Lisa. Powerless, overwhelm, isolation.
Adriana asked, and I'm not going to unmute just because it was a really simple, short question. What is the name of the program that you've been talking about?
Yeah, Core Communities are the projects we build. Other people do poverty projects, but I don't think they have the culture right, so they don't get the results we have.
Core Communities out of
Greensburg, Kansas, which is a little tiny town. But Youth Core Ministries, the projects are not faith-based, but there's a ministry behind it. Like it's not a faith-based process, right?
So it's through Youth Core Ministries.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just going to drop the link into the chat.
Yep, core communities, you got it.
Okay, cool. Let me scroll back up.
Yeah, someone also said I have never heard it before. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Hey, wow.
I'm not sure. I think it was Lisa who said that. I don't know if you want to add any more to that, but
yeah, I'm gonna unmute Lisa, who had a question about people of color and how poverty may affect them differently. So Lisa Kennedy. I unmuted you, and I think you just have to accept the unmute.
Thank you. I didn't see that. Hi, thank you so much for the opportunity to be a part of this and for sharing your story. And so much of it resonates with me. But my question was around you're starting out a new program in that particular town, adding people of color to the conversation. And I was wondering how has or will your program change? Because when you add race to any other thing, no matter what the topic is, it changes. And so poverty for some, and I was happy to hear you say a few minutes ago about being in poverty doesn't always mean that there's trauma or crime or anything else. And so sometimes it's something I say within our community, just because people are poor doesn't mean they can't learn, doesn't mean they can't grow, doesn't mean they can't do anything. It just means that they're poor. So I was wondering how or what changes occurred in your program once you added race, because access and all the things that you discuss are certainly things that people in poverty need, but there are extra layers, systemic issues that people of color have to face. And so I would think programming may look different.
You said thank you. We got called to Bond County by a bunch of white people, amazing white people, right? Because they're like, we want to solve this. And then we started building community relationships, and it was this incredible Black woman, Monique. She showed up, and she's like, I'm bringing my people here. And so we do not have answers, Lisa, for you. I will tell you that right when we got ready to launch that project, COVID hit. And so we were doing Zoom meetings. I was meeting with the families through Zoom, just kind of laying out the culture of our project and the atmosphere, how we want it to feel for people. And then the Black Lives Matter movement started happening. And I knew we would be remiss. We got white staff in the room, Black families, and there's this thing going on. And it was really interesting when I got to Bond County. I was asking the white people that had the power, that were kind of driving the process. I'm like, so do you guys see poverty through a lens of race first here? And they're like, oh no, and then I asked the Black families, and they're like, absolutely, race is an issue here, right? So it's really fascinating to listen to people's perspectives. Mm-hmm. But normally we don't do politics in our projects. Like we want everybody who has all different kinds of beliefs to be at the table together, sharing life, right? Faith is not a requirement. You can bring your faith, you don't have to have it, whatever. But I asked the families, I'm like, look, this is happening and you guys are all Black. We need to open this up and you need to tell us what to do. And it was really fascinating, Lisa. They let me in that night into a very sacred space with them. And I just listened as they talked about a better kind of Black, and they talked about just all of these things. And so I wish I had great answers for you, but we don't. But I promise you, just like I promised the families, we are going to be intentional about asking, and also about being taught when we misstep. Because truth be told, we don't know what to do, right? So I know that there are many other layers, but I don't know what those are yet. I need families to teach me, and then we have to figure out how to move those layers, knock them down, get through them, elevate, aware, whatever that is. So it's probably not the answer you wanted.
No, just to even start the conversation. And there was another point that you made about folks coming around the table to address an issue, and the folks that they need to address the issue aren't at the table. And that is so what we do on almost every system out there, and it's very frustrating, because that's one of the questions I always ask, is because you can't solve a problem you have no connection to. Just because you have the money doesn't mean that you have a connection to the problem that you need. You'd be a great resource for funding purposes or access, but you don't possess the answers. And usually when you get folks in the room, the answer's in the room.
The answer's in the room. The families know what they need.
Room.
Nobody's ever asked, right? And not token people either. You know, like sometimes I think people get this person that comes from that so we can say we've got one. Like there's actually government programs out there where you have to have certain demographics seated at the table, but they don't make decisions. It's just really sad. I'm like, I don't know. Anyways.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah.
There's Dorothy Roberts is the author of Shattered Bonds, The Color of Child Welfare, and she's been writing a lot of stuff, and there's some stuff in the links from the Chronicles of Social Change, because she's been talking and writing a lot about defunding the police and how a lot of people are promoting a model of replacing police with social workers, but she's saying if we do that without doing race work, then we end up policing families. Mm-hmm. You know, if we make all, if we don't understand the connection and racial bias and white supremacy, then the child welfare system as it currently exists, as you were saying, Rebecca, where families are terrified of losing kids and sharing struggles because of fear of losing kids, and how much more severely parents of color are treated in terms of, if the same reports are made to child welfare, you know, what makes a case and what doesn't when families are taken away. Race is a huge part of it. How long kids are kept in child welfare, how often they're returned, how long cases drag out. So she just writes a lot about, you know, we have to understand all these systems, so we're not just moving where problems are.
Yeah, and anytime we invest in parents, we're investing in children.
Can you say more about that?
So that's what the poverty projects are about. You know, a way I help people think this through is that for years we've been going into trailer parks and neighborhoods and pulling kids out on Sunday morning and taking them places, right? We've been going in on Wednesday nights. We've been taking them to church, right? Under this idea that we're going to go in and create these interventions and help these kids. And nothing changes because we're not getting to the families. We're not getting to the parents in an authentic way to say, hey, what do you need? Who are you? We want to be in relationship with you, right? We're not bringing people into community. And so, you know, in the poverty projects, that's what we do. The kids go to childcare, they have fun. Sometimes somebody brings a curriculum in if they want to do that, but it's all about the families and the moms and dads. If you can get to me as a mother and give me what I need and help me find and create a better path for my life, I will get to my children. But we always want to jump to the kids. It's all about the kids. Well, and it's like when I do trauma-informed trainings with schools, we don't hardly talk about kids. I talk about the adults in the building. Our teachers are hurting and they're overwhelmed and there's vicarious trauma and that turns into cruelty, right? If you want to transform the lives of children, you focus on the adults who are important in their lives. That's how we do this. And if our child welfare system would die, and then we build a new one around helping families, right? We would start to see, because the child welfare system is not broken. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. This is what it was built to do. And so we need something different. And it is about, you know, you look at Chuck from Waupaca County, Waupaca County, Wisconsin. He was doing incredible child welfare work up there. You can find him on Twitter, Chuck Price. And, you know, he's the one that taught me these things. He's worked in child welfare for decades. And he said, you know, Rebecca, the system needs fed. And what does the system eat? Our mass incarceration system needs fed. All systems must eat. What do they eat? You're gonna get me in all kinds of trouble with this recording, aren't you, Cissy? We're saying all kinds of stuff we shouldn't be saying.
No, but I think when it comes to kids, I think ACEs science has really moved a lot of us for understanding in school systems, especially you know, that whole shift that we all know, it's not what it's not what's wrong with you, it's what happened. And I think a lot of us have really made the shift with kids, but it's a harder shift when it's adults.
Yeah.
When we're talking about adults, when we're talking about parents, I think that's where our cultural punitive ideas about punishing parents, bad parents,
Broken
it's
people.
still, yeah, it's still
Lots
much
of
more like it used to
choices.
be with, you know, bad behavior in students, which we have really shifted in a lot of places, but I think it's a harder shift when it comes to parents.
Yeah, and healing our own lives. I mean, that's where my work centers around. We build these poverty projects, and I just want to do a shameless plug too for the work that we're doing, Cissy, that you connected me to. We're doing that experiential trauma-informed workshops, school and family peace framework, 2 days experiential trauma-informed work. It is, you know, I've been looking for that next thing, right? I don't need more information. I want to know how to quickly do something that will transform people's lives. And that's also something that I'll give you information about that in the blog post. But that is powerful, about finding the origin of our shadow stories, going back and touching those feelings so that we can integrate those feelings, right? Understanding our golden messages, how to be enlightened witnesses in people's lives, an internal focused dialogue, what's happening inside of me, not what do I think or them or they, but what's going on inside of me, in my body, right? Mad, sad, glad, and afraid. Like, how do we build that? We're working on a curriculum for schools, because right now I don't believe we have a neuro-informed, trauma-informed school curriculum for social emotional. We have a bunch of character ed that they keep dressing it up and throwing some other trauma-informed in there, but it makes me ill when I see it, because it's all about if you would just, and you don't know, so we're going to teach you, and that's not what's going on. People don't need character ed. Character develops naturally when you have what you need. Yeah. It just starts to happen, right? Anyways, we're going to go over.
Now, I call that edu-puking, which I'm like, edu-puking stinks for everyone. For those doing it.
Yeah, we pay for that, right? We pay for this character ed that it's not as bad. It just works amazingly well on the kids that don't need it. And it shames the kids that do, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that some of the people you've done the experiential work with are on the call here today too. So
hey,
yeah, Carrie, James, yeah.
Carrie, what are you doing? I didn't know you were on here, and I knew James was here too. Yeah, amazing.
So I wanted to throw in some numbers really quickly, and then maybe take one or two more questions before we start wrapping up. But Lynn had asked a little while ago, about a half hour ago, poverty appears to be the most prevalent. And you said prevalent ACEs. Poverty itself is not part of the original ACEs study, but I just was like, in my head, I was like, well, we always said in grad school, I just got my master's of public health, that poverty is the number one risk factor for having a high ACEs score. And then I was kind of like, wait, did I just make that up? So I Googled it, and I found a statistic that I just want to share. This is from childtrends.org. It says that poor children are more likely to have experienced 3 or more adverse experiences. In 2016, 13% of children living below the poverty level had 3 or more adverse experiences, compared to 5% of the children in households with incomes more than twice the poverty level. So anytime we can kind of have numbers that go along with our discussion, I always feel like that's important to share. So I'm going to throw that along with the link if you want to see some of these statistics. It's great to know what those are. And then let's go ahead and let me find another question. There have been so many good ones. Let's see. Maybe Shasta, is that how you say your name? I'm going to unmute you. Okay, you're unmuted. If you
Hi, hello.
Okay, cool.
Hey.
Hi. It's my name's Shaz. I'm here from UK. Really inspired about what's been spoken about today. My question really is, what inspired Rebecca to go on this journey for positive change, and what have been the challenges so far for her?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I can tell you that I had the gift of desperation. I was gonna die if I didn't get sober. I was physically addicted to alcohol. In 2010, I cycled in and out of hospitals. Every time I'd stop drinking, I'd go straight to the hospital because I would physically start withdrawals. So I don't think it was inspiring. You know, and on the last, so I don't want to go into a kind of a faith story about, but I made a promise that because I lived through that I was going to give my life to this work, whatever this work was. I didn't know at the time that I would run as fast as I could run, because everything on this side of that was a gift. So it's a gift of desperation. Certainly does not look like a gift at the time. You know, you look back and you're like, I was hard-headed. Like, you couldn't teach me anything. I knew everything, right? And anyways, so thanks for that question, though. And I did want to say that, Carrie, thanks for putting Family Peace Initiative in the chat, too, because social work world, criminal justice world, the Family Peace Initiative, which is in the chat, is where I learned how to do the school and family peace framework work. They've been walking alongside of us to figure out how to get it into schools, which James Encinas and Cissy White, that's how I got to that table, right? So thanks for doing that, Carrie. I was like, oh my gosh, did I not say that?
Yeah. Jane, can I unmute you to share your comment?
Sure. About the poverty piece. Yeah, I have never liked, our concept of poverty, because I think that it sort of mushes things up, and it makes people who are in poverty, it's their responsibility to get out, or maybe they have saviors who lift them out of poverty. We don't need poverty. There's no reason for poverty. It's our systems that are keeping people in these traumatic situations. And I think I would prefer to focus on all the systems that need changing, rather than focusing on poverty. I don't think it gets us anywhere. So just my 2 cents.
But we get so brainwashed to think it's our individual responsibility. I grew up in a low income family, and I got to college and I had all these ideas in my head that were like, the bootstraps kind of thing, that people just need to have more personal responsibility. Rebecca, where does that brainwashing come from? Like, or Cissy, any ideas? Is it from the media, or what is it?
Well, I think there's certain narratives out there that are really helpful to keep systems in place. And you get those narratives spinning, and they'll take on a life of their own. And then people will do the work for you of keeping those narratives there. So all I can tell you is that when I got to the Poverty Project and we started to uncover what you said, Jane, that maybe it wasn't my fault. That's a big deal, right? And I've sat with countless other families as they've had that aha moment, because I thought that before that night at 37 years old, I really thought I was in poverty because I was a defective person. And now there's still some sickness behind the next thought, the aha moment, because it still didn't transform for me right away. But that night I realized maybe I'm a defective person because I'm in poverty. So there's tremendous shame and burden. And you're right, Jane, systems plays a monumental role in that. And, we need to talk about the welfare trap and the cliff effects and all of these other pieces. And, you think about the jillions of dollars that we spend on mass incarceration and child welfare and all of these other things. You're right, Jane. If we stopped doing that, we wouldn't need that anymore. People could have enough. And people, when they have enough, they start thriving and doing all kinds of cool things, right? And so anyways, that's another story. Cissy, you asked me to talk about the poverty simulation, so I don't want to let time get away.
Yeah, I think do we have time, Allison, or do we have to make a
we
simulation?
we can take just a couple minutes if you want to talk about that, and then we'll wrap up that can be kind of our conclusion. And I just want to say how grateful I am to Cissy for making this conversation happen, and to Rebecca. Oh my gosh, I have learned so much from you in this hour. Oh my gosh, such a good one. And I can't wait to put this recording up so other people can experience this magic. Like, I didn't even know, like, I personally needed to hear your message. Like, I feel better, me. And raise your hand if you agree.
That's Rebecca. That's Rebecca. That's Rebecca.
Oh my gosh. So thank you so much. And I'm feeling all the love in the chat. I want to say this is the most love I've felt ever in the chat on A Better Normal. Like, I've never seen this much love. So I think you really brought that energy here, Rebecca, with your vulnerability. But every single one of you who joined this call today, you met her where she was at. And I just want to say thank you for doing that. Anyway, I'll turn it over to Cissy and Rebecca to start wrapping up, and we will go just a couple minutes over.
Yeah, why don't you talk about the simulations a little bit, but we can include more in the blog follow-up as well.
So poverty simulations, you've got them, you just got to find them where they're at. Like, they're a kit that you can stick a whole bunch of people in poverty for an hour. I went ahead and wrote one because I felt like they were kind of all written from a middle class perspective. But trust me, if you get one that was written from a middle class perspective, it will still freak people out. And they go through poverty for an hour. The one I wrote, we have a drug dealer, and I run them in schools with teachers. And all the teachers start moving drugs for money and stealing within the first 10 minutes. Because they go straight into their survival brain, and they're like, holy crap, right? And they start negotiating with the cops and the child welfare system and like hustling. And so anyways, find a poverty simulation. If you want to start changing conversations in your community. I also, right now in the pandemic, nobody wants to do one, but I travel all over the United States and run the one that I wrote from me. It's coming from a trailer park, right? So that's just a great tool to start changing stories, right, in your town or your city. So that's it, Cissy. We'll get more info in there. So.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I can't wait to write this up. I'm so grateful to you. You are so inspiring. You're one of my role models. So thank you so much for being here. And Allison, thank you for being a wonderful facilitator, as always. And Jane, thank you for starting this organization so we can have these conversations. And so great to see new and familiar faces on here as well.
Yeah, Elizabeth, I never got to spend time with you yet. And Lisa Kennedy, I've watching your name for a long time. I'm like, now I know her. And Jane, I love you. Cissy, I love you. And Allison, good to know you now.
Likewise.
Yeah, and Carrie and James, we're on this kind of enlightened journey together. I can't wait to talk about that too soon. So.
Wow, this has been really, really wonderful. Thank you again, Cissy, Rebecca. Thank you for all the ACES Connection staff who joined the call. Jane, Carrie, and Karen, I saw for sure on here. So I just want all of you to know that, first of all, this will be posted to our YouTube and to our website soon. And we will send a follow-up email to everyone with some of those links. But also, if you want to save the chat before, this is like a new thing I just learned to remind everyone. You can click on the 3 dots in the chat and then click Save Chat. So, you can do that before we close out this call, which I think is great because there's a lot of cool resources in there that people dropped in. So thank you all so much for sharing those wonderful resources and for sharing just who you are and all the great comments and questions. And my apologies that we didn't get to all of them. They were all wonderful. And I hope you have a wonderful Friday or Saturday for our New Zealand person, and have a great weekend, and we'll see you next Thursday is the next one, education upended. Okay.